Okay, and just to say very briefly that, well, I'll explain where the research is coming from. But my own background personally is I've been in the energy industry about and started off as a consumer psychologist in utilities, the utilities area. My PhD was in that as well. And but after 16 years of focusing on these issues directly, I think we've kind of we understand quite a lot about the way customers think. But of course, we're still quite a long way from having solutions in place in markets that can actually deliver what we know they should. So, okay, so move myself on with this. Okay, so just to say one thing, if you are interested in this kind of thing, and you want to go to a fabulous castle, and a fabulous Henry VIII castle, think there, brainstorm there, sleep there, and just have a great deal of whiskey, then actually we have an event that's actually happening in December. It's called Leeds Castle, but it's actually near London. It's in Kent, in England. And we've got a demand response event where we talk about these issues with people from all around the world. It's a very small event, but very, very high level thinkers from around the world. So if you want to brainstorm, just to let you know. Anyway, so what are we talking about with dynamic pricing or smart pricing? We're talking about really just a few different types that you've probably heard of. We're talking about time of use, we're talking about critical peak pricing, and we're talking about real-time pricing of other kinds. So the question is, how do we get customers more interested in this? Can we get customers more interested in this? We've heard that we need to get customer engagement, but there are many benefits to be had in terms of business models for utilities, but also ultimately for savings for customers if we can get them active in and using these types of pricing schemes. Okay, so where we've got this data from, the first one was a project called Empower Demand Phase 1, and that was a project which we did in 2011. It's a public project, you can get hold of it. It's a big report, very statistical report, looking at about 100 pilot programs around the world, and the sort of outcomes of that, and how much potential there was and success in the market. In addition to that, we then have done a new Empower Demand Phase 2, and that one has just been released actually today. It was actually released in the hall next door, actually by Howard Porter from ESMIG, and they are the sponsors of that. And that tries to look in detail at a selection of the better, I would say some of the best programs within that 100 that we looked at, and going to real detail and trying to figure out exactly what it was about the communication and the engagement that got customers involved in those pilots. And I think what's been found more than anything is that none of those pilots, of course, hold all the answers, but all of those pilots, those programs, hold many answers. And if you put them together, we have quite a plethora of great ideas and suggestions and templates to go forwards with all of these issues. So a lot of research. I said that last report is about 125 pages of very detailed qualitative analysis, and the previous one is about 100 pages of quantitative analysis, but with some good summaries there. So there's a lot of data. It's very much factual. Okay, so what are the conventional wisdoms in relating to smart pricing or dynamic pricing? First of all, that customers want predictable flat prices. And I'm not denying that they actually do want predictable flat prices. The fact is, if I think of the literally, I think it's 1 million customers that I've researched over the years directly, one thing is that we've learned is that, yes, predictability is one of those key drivers that the customer wants. The question is, what do we actually mean by predictability, or rather, what does a customer mean by predictability? You know, the fact is, when you look at the markets as they are now, and these are actually, I'm looking also at the Australian market here because that's the most active market in the world in terms of customer switching. And Colin mentioned that just a moment ago as well, that it's an interesting market to learn from. And okay, price and volatility increases in that market, as in other markets, lead to the search for predictability. Customers have had a lot of price increases in recent years. And what that means is that they're looking for a way out. Sometimes they do that through having long-term contracts where they have a fixed price. And just one example, I won't say the name of the utility, but there was a utility in Great Britain a few years ago, a number of years ago, that actually put great big banners everywhere. When British Gas put up their prices, this other utility had these big banners everywhere, stating that if you don't like these price increases, come to our fixed price, and you'll have a fixed price for the next few years. It was hundreds of thousands of customers who took that offer in a matter of a few months. There's a very big switch of customers to that company who gave them that. Actually, that company had already raised its prices. So actually, the customers were moving to a company which actually gave them fixed prices, but at a higher level, because they'd actually already fixed them. Now, the thing is that in customers' search for predictability, the reality is that they feel that the prices just keep going up, or at least they feel the prices keep going up. And this is leading to customers feeling, in a way, abused. They feel trapped. And so despite what they're trying to do, they feel that there's not an awful lot they can do about these prices. So although customers want flat, fixed prices maybe, and simple prices for sure, the reality is that those prices are not bringing them predictability even in the current form. So, okay, so the proportion, if we look at just markets, okay, this isn't really talking about dynamic pricing, but if we actually look at certain European countries, we will actually see that the split between fixed-term contract prices and variable contract prices. In other words, prices that are fixed over a period of time and prices that change quite a lot, depending on the country. Sometimes they might just change once a year, but sometimes they change in the case of Norway often more often than that. But actually you start to see a changing shape of things. Although in most countries customers do have very flat prices, you're starting to see more and more countries where customers are preferring to have slightly more volatile prices in order that they have maybe smaller margins, more transparency. And one of those would be, for example, Norway, and we have some Norwegians here. But if you look at Norway, 55% of customers now have spot-tied contracts. And that means a contract that is, to some extent, tied to the spot market, and the retailer is charging a commission on that tied rate. Now, this is naturally more volatile. And if you look at Sweden as well, in the old days, most customers who are switching supplier were choosing to have fixed-term contracts. That is now changing, and customers are increasingly choosing to have variable contracts, and actually some quite interesting contracts that are much more volatile, but also more transparent. So gradually we are seeing some changes in the market where you can see that this hypothesis that customers automatically want more fixed prices doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Okay, so another thing, an alternative wisdom then might be customers want a simple, predictably good deal. And you know, any company that's involved in the switching sites, switching services will tell you that generally speaking, customers want a good deal. And I'd like to say, first of all, VaasaETT is actually the world's leading source of data on customer switching trends around the world, and also on residential end-user prices in Europe. And from that, we try to get this picture of what customers can actually say. But one thing that is absolutely clear is that customers want a good deal, and that can take many different forms. It can also take more volatile forms, if that means. It's like buying your house. When you buy your house, do you have a fixed rate mortgage, which will be higher, or do you have a variable rate mortgage, which is more risky in some senses, but if you feel you know where the market's going, then it's cheaper. Okay, so then, so another conventional wisdom would be then that, So another conventional wisdom would be that customers save money through competition and energy efficiency. Okay, so that would be energy efficiency we can talk to in a moment. But if you think of competition, do customers save money through competition? Is that a way that customers can get out of this problem of raising prices? Well, actually, when we look at savings that they can get, and maybe that's partly why in Britain we actually see some negativity towards this, you notice that actually savings across Europe generally, on average, are not that great from switching either. So we hear that the savings are not that great from energy efficiency. We believe differently, actually, but for sure, savings from switching company are not necessarily that good either. So what are customers' choices? They're trapped by these what they see as unfair prices and raising prices in the market. An alternative then would be energy efficiency, and this is part of the research that we did as part of analyzing those 100 pilots around the world. And we found, for instance, if you can see that clearly there, you see that there are some very, very large savings on that. These are just the average savings. And I said there are 100 pilots. Yes, some of them were in America, but we've also segmented that down to European level as well. And you see that critical peak pricing can be very, very effective. Now, these are averages over pilots, and I would agree, if you look at just the European pilots and you take out and you just look at energy efficiency in general, savings are much smaller, and the report goes into that in great detail. I'm not saying that this is your average saving for a typical energy efficiency program, but when you have critical peak pricing programs, the savings can be very great, much greater with automation than without automation. And what the recent report we've done that's just being published today says is that it's not what you do, it's definitely the way that you do it that matters. That's what very often shows a difference. And I must admit that very often when you look at a lot of the pilots that are bringing in low scores in energy efficiency and demand response, it's easy to see why that actually is the case. Okay, so then, so an alternative wisdom might be customers save money and energy efficiency, or can save money and energy efficiency, through becoming partners in the energy market on equal terms with the energy industry. And just one example, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but in the downstairs, you might see this Their Corporation, just one company. Now, we're not working for them, so we're not in any way vested interest in that. But the reality is that it's exciting, because what's happening is they've launched a product, or rather Fortum, the energy company in Finland, has launched a product whereby customers can control their hot water heating, and that hot water heating is automated, it's automatically controlled for them, but it's linked to the Nordic spot market. And the Nordic spot market has reasonable volatility. It's a very good, efficient market, wholesale market. And actually what happens then is that the heating system is timed throughout the day to make sure that it's on when the prices are lower and off when the prices are higher. It's the first case that we've seen of that. We don't know how successful it will be because they've only just launched it. But what we're seeing is some commercial offerings then, or the first commercial offering that's appeared in that space. And certainly technically it works. And, but from the customer's point of view, it's a profit-sharing scheme. The utility benefits by ultimately getting the customer engaged in sharing the volatility in the market. The customer saves by actually taking advantage of that volatility rather than suffering from it. Okay, so then conventional wisdom would also be that automation with incentives is enough. Okay, so maybe looking at the Fortum thing, maybe automation is enough. And in many cases, we've seen great results from automation. But interestingly, what we've also seen is that automation on its own, without education, without a very good customer understanding, is not such a perfect idea. In fact, what we've found from that, to summarize that, what we've found is that when customers are on automation schemes and they haven't first been through the exploration and personal experience and feedback that other customers have, that actually at non-controlled times or in ways that they are not controlled automatically, those customers are actually less efficient even than they would be if they had no automation at all, because they believe that the automation is doing everything for them, so they have no need to do it themselves. And that can be a negative impact of automation. Similarly to that, as we say, at peak hours, reduction is 40% more effective when participants are provided with education. So, of course, we're not saying that automation should happen on its own. We're saying that you need to engage the customer. Automation needs to, and dynamic pricing needs to automate that. So an alternative would be automation with incentives has major limitations. We need to have both automation and customer involvement at the same time. Another thing then is that what I would say is that, as an alternative wisdom, that without smart pricing, there simply is not enough benefit for a customer. We've heard it before. What you can gain from saving a bit of energy in your home from feedback is limited. But once you bring in these partnerships, sharing schemes that we're talking about, and we're working with a lot of other organizations and aggregators and so on that have some great futuristic ideas as to how you'll create value and share value, I think that's when you bring in the benefit to the customer. But how does it achieved? Basically, first of all, many ways, and these are just a few of those ways that we're considering. First of all, to allow customers to become accustomed to price volatility. We're not saying that you suddenly shove it on them You start sitting on them with these prices. Of course, customers want to feel always that they are in control and that it's happening in their way. In Australia, when they introduced time of use pricing on customers without their permission, they had a really bad time of it from the media, and they had to actually stop that. We don't want that to happen over here. Also, ensure a fair and transparent link between the sacrifice and reward. That's through experimentation. The customers have to see the rewards through experimentation. We heard it from Scottish Power, that they have to kind of explore and learn what those benefits are directly. Also, avoid suspicion and backlash by giving customers, as I said, the control. Also, heavily support smart prices within education and feedback. There's a very major element of that to get, and a very, very often pre-rollout education, not just during and after even. And as I said before, it's not just what you do, but it's the way that you do it. This is very often what we see. We think of a pilot has done something and it hasn't worked. I must admit this is very much an energy industry phenomenon, which is that if I've tried it and it didn't work, it can't work. Rather than I tried it, I didn't do it quite right, I can do it better next time. The best have done it well. I've got to learn from all the best and try to improve on that. Okay, so looking at these, integrating the best practice, what we're ultimately saying is that the best programs integrate all these characteristics, but so far none of them have actually put all of them together. So when we talk about the potential of demand response, we haven't seen it yet because it's never actually been done in a fully integrated fashion. Okay, so just I'll let you look at this in your time, but what we're saying as part of that is that there are many stages to creating the education that the customer has, many different stages, and actually the technology should be brought in at a later stage. This is basically saying that first you get the public communication and the education, and gradually you introduce the technologies. And this industry, we've tended to do it the other way around. Okay, other just things I just rush through, basically, but step-by-step discovery. We need solutions that have been done in practice that actually give the customer to learn their own way that dynamic pricing can be good before they necessarily step into it. In the case of, for example, O-Power, this is just one example, but it is actually very easy to give customers some sort of feedback from these, from the energy that they're using that can say to them, okay, if you had been using this tariff, this dynamic tariff, you would have saved this much money. Gradually, over time, the customer learns that they would have been better with a dynamic tariff, and then they're given the option, okay, do you want to switch over? And we do it. It's possible to work the customer into that gradually. And another thing, other supportive feedback channels, for example. We have to make sure that we give the customer the channels that support that freedom to have the information that they need, to feel comfortable that they are, or feel safe that they are, that they feel safe in that pricing mechanism that they're exposed to. But in terms of those channels, we see some very interesting channels, ways of communicating to customers. Telling a customer that they have a high or low price time of day can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can just be a color on an orb, as you see there. But actually, there are very simple ways that we can communicate that to a customer. I won't go through this, but you can read it if you want in the presentation when you get it. But just to say that there's a lot of different feedback that we've identified as being ways in which you can build that customer education, build that awareness and confidence from the customer. And things like, for example, a customer who has time of use, not just telling them how they can save, but actually telling them at any point in time for their situation and their individual lifestyle, exactly what they can do now, how you can save energy now, how you make the most of the price at this very moment. And things such as this done in the CER, the Irish trials, smart meter trials, where you give customers simply a sticker that they put on their fridge that tells them when the high and low price times are. You might think, okay, so who cares about that? Well, actually 75% of participants said that they were useful as part of their experience. And again, not going through, there's just three things I mentioned there, which is motivational messages. There are basically three stages that we've identified to motivational messages. The first is reasons to be positive about the overall developments. This is the public level thing. The second thing is reasons to get involved, and there are many of them. And the third thing is the eliminations of reasons not to get involved. And all of those lists there, I don't want you to read now, but basically all of those are messages that have been used in practice, in pilots, to some useful effect. But what we're saying is that you've split them into those three categories of messages. So my main message here is that there's a lot that is known. There's a lot that can be done. There are lots of learnings. Only some of them have been implemented by most pilots. Some pilots have implemented more than others, but no pilots have implemented all of them. If we focus on what we can do, then we can achieve a lot going forwards. And I think that if we move at the right pace, with the right support, the right education, and the right services and solutions, we can get a customer who is interested and willing to adopt these smart prices. But going back to what we said many times before, I think the thing is that different services for different customers. Not all customers will want this, and we shouldn't even expect it. We give horses for courses, the right solutions for the right customers. But just one last thing would be empathy and trust. We cannot move forward with these things until and unless we gain the trust of the industry, the trust that can only be built by mutual benefit, such as the example I mentioned that Fortum are doing, and also by guarantees, at least in the initial instance, guarantees and promises. But overall, I think there's reason to be positive. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, as chairman, I'll move on so that I actually don't waste any time asking myself questions. And we've got the question and answers session later on. But okay, so now we have the final speaker, who actually may certainly disagree with me on a lot of these issues, and he's welcome to. But